Hey everyone, this is Britton here. I'm live. I send you guys topics. When you guys present a topic, that is always a topic of the night. Tonight, I got some feedback. I thought I'd ask. I was really struggling this week. It's been an interesting week. I've gotten sucked in. I'm in a group, and you're just literally watching the world unravel before your eyes, rapidly, just rapidly. Maybe not the world, but at least our society. And you're seeing. It's funny. So we want to talk about justice tonight and the justice system, and Christendom developed this justice system over many, many years. It was definitely morphed during the Enlightenment, but we came up with these principles of justice, and then we're just seeing all of that, which took years and years and wisdom to develop this great system that we have. It's not perfect, but it's a great system, and we just watch it unravel, and people just throw it out the window. You know, they saw a meme, so they know better now. Than all the people, wise people came for him. Anyway, so I did want to talk about that. I thought that was really interesting, justice, but that can't be the topic for tonight. It's such an important topic. I really want to think it through. It's actually what I'm writing right now. I'm writing about authority. I'm actually writing about wisdom right now, and how it ties to authority and stuff like that. So I want to think that through a little bit more before I address it, and be really careful because it's such a hot topic right now. So I will address that soon, maybe next week. Tonight I wanted to address the anger. I think a lot of parents deal with that with kids who are struggling with anger. And since that was the first topic basically, and then some other people voted for it, I thought I would talk tonight about children who are angry, dealing with anger in children. First of all, I would say that my best is always in the book. I'm not a great speaker. I do these things off the cuff. I have a few notes, but I'm not ready. That's why I'm almost always late. I'm scrambling to try to get a few notes down so something sticks and makes sense. Always read the books, it's better. When we talk about discipline and self-control, I've written great chapters. That is me at my finest. And like last week, I did this topic on authority, and I don't know if it connected with a lot of people because it's off the cuff and there's so many nuanced things and maybe some things I said wrong that people need to correct me on. That's why it's so important to come to the lives and ask me to clarify. So anyway, we're talking about anger tonight, anger in children. This is just off the top of my head, so we'll see how it goes. First thing, anger isn't a problem, actually. Anger isn't a sin. Paul says, be angry and don't sin. It's the same thing as being sad. It's within our range of emotions, so there's no problem with anger. Anger, I don't remember if I wrote this in character. I don't remember where I wrote it. Maybe I haven't published it yet, but I said anger is my favorite emotion. It really has served me well. There's so many times in my life where I've had struggles, or maybe I was mistreated, or just, and anger is a champion, and it pushed me through that sense of anger that I'm going to fight back. I'm going to win this. I'm going to prove these people wrong. I am a huge fan of anger. I don't think there's anything wrong with anger. The Bible talks about God being angry, and I think we inherently kind of know this, but actually I think in practice, we don't practice it. If we see our kid angry, we want to be happy. Happy's more fun. It makes us feel better about our children if they're happy. And so a lot of times we push that on people, and there is a time to be angry. I'm happy to see my kids if they're angry sometimes about certain things, but it's proper anger, okay? Now, wrath is a sin, and we shouldn't confuse the two. Anger is a normal emotion. It's the difference between being sad and suicidal. Suicidal is a sin, unless you believe it's psychological or something, and you have no control over it. But historically, anger is a sin. You're thinking about murdering yourself. Of course, if you do, that is not good. But sadness or sorrow, that's normal. We even go through lows, kind of depressions in our life. It's kind of like the fall of our life. That's a normal emotion. Happiness is great, but I know happy people, and sometimes they're superficial, and I'm like, sometimes I'm like, aren't you angry about that? No, I just try to be positive stuff. I'm like, dude, they're doing this to children, and you're not angry, and you're Christian. How can you not be angry about that? So let's not favor happiness over the other emotions. There's definitely nothing wrong with anger. Now, wrath and how we deal with our anger, it can be a sin, just like all of the other emotions. If you're feeling some lows, you can lean on God and trust not in your own understanding and continue walking in faith, or you can become so depressed you want to hurt yourself, or you kind of become like this pathetic kind of like person. You can become happy, and happiness is your medicine. That's all you want to do is live for pleasure and happiness, and you never get down to business, and that can become a sin. So it's not the emotion that's the problem. It's how we handle it. If my kid is angry about something, it's not a problem. I say, hey, what are you angry about? And then we analyze the situation. What are you angry about? My sister hit me. Oh, okay, that's very reasonable that you're angry, that you're outraged by that. Let's go deal with that. Thank you for telling me. I'm angry because my little brother's being annoying. Okay, what is he doing? Well, he's singing. Dude, he's 3 years old. He's singing toddler songs. There's nothing wrong with that. That's normal. That's actually good for him. Why don't you pick up and go to another room? Or better yet, why don't you develop some self-control, some toughness to you? That's a weakness. And I told my daughter that the other day. I'm like, that's your problem. That's not his problem. You're being petty. You're weak. You can't filter anything out. I'm like, think back to your chess days when there was all those distractions. It was a challenge. Filter it out. Who cares? Put on some headsets. You don't have to be annoyed and bothered. And he has every right to sing his little whatever he does. He likes to sing. So you have to analyze the situation and help your children analyze it too and say, is your anger justified? Because it might be. It might absolutely be. Anyway, so I would say that. The other thing with siblings, and we're talking specifically about what Kristen said first, because I got that when I had a little bit of time. Brenda, I'll try to get to yours, but it'll be totally extemporaneous because I didn't have any time to write anything for Brenda. It was just last minute. I just barely saw it. So dealing with sibling rivalries, we have an older kid who, I don't know the ages. If you're on, Kristen, let me know the ages, but there's a 6-year age difference, so it's substantial. And a lot of times, I don't know the specific situation, so I'm just speaking generally, Kristen. I don't know your specific situation, just speaking generally. One thing is sometimes parents tend to favor the younger child. We can't help it. They're so cute and adorable, and we have those parent eyes for them, and maybe the kid is being annoying. Maybe he's being obnoxious. Maybe it's not just kind of normal, like cute, like, a 3-year-old. Maybe he's just being annoying. Maybe he's bugging the older sibling. The older sibling's doing what he should be doing for an older age. He just wants to read or he's doing some work or something like that. And the other kid is pestering him. And so there's nothing wrong with him. It's 9 and 3. Okay. You know what? I have a similar situation. Christian's perfect, except it's a 13-year-old and a 3-year-old. And they're not like at each other by any means. But just the other day, my oldest daughter, she was working for us. Actually, she was putting in books for Blue Manor, and she was working at the table. And I think I don't remember exactly the situation. I think he was singing, and I was like, hey, that's actually not that unreasonable. And you're in the kitchen. You can't just tell people to go away. Like, they're allowed to be in the kitchen. You can go find your own private spot if you need it. So sometimes I know that old parents tend to favor their baby, the baby of the family. And that can be a problem too. And I remember when I was a kid, I had a sister, a half-sister, and this happened to both of my sisters. They're both younger. This was a half-sister, and my other sister, my mom and my stepmom favored them. And I remember that they knew that they could get away with it. So one time, and me and my stepsister, we became very good friends and stuff. So this is just one instance. I hate to even talk about my own family situation because it is a weird one at this point. So I don't want to badmouth them or anything on social media. But we were bickering basically one time, and it was interesting. One of the adults said, "I'm like, dude, she won't leave me alone. She's like annoying me. She's picking on me." And she's like, "Well, boys pick on girls." I was like, what does that mean? Like, she's literally annoying me. She's like, she's just having fun with you. And so the younger sibling realized she could get away with it. And I remember like one morning I'm like eating my cereal, just trying to mind my own business. And the other, I'm not even gonna say which sister it was because it's not about that. But the younger sibling was like, like making these crazy noises in my face, trying to bother me. And she knew she could get away with it because every time I complained about it, the adult, I'm just gonna say it was an adult, would say, "Oh, you're just being petty. Just stop it." And so this my younger sibling, this was for I'm not criticizing, just a tiny little window of my life, was harassing me all the time, of being obnoxious as possible, and she enjoyed it. And that's normal. And older siblings will do that too. My daughter is the sweetest one, my little Emma. She's so sweet. She's so good with the boys. I can't say anything. But even the other day I saw she was kind of picking at her little brother to make him scream. Because it's funny. It is kind of amusing. I mean, when you make a little guy scream and he's all upset for, something really silly. And she was enjoying that. I'm like, hey, you're being a bully. What's your problem? And I had to set her straight. So some of that's normal. But we also want to like set boundaries and say, hey, listen, your brother is older than you. He doesn't want to play baby games with you all day. You need to give him some space right now. And you need to set that boundary. And he should be allowed, I would say, he should probably be allowed to set that boundary for himself if he needs that. And then I would go to the older sibling and I would say, hey, listen, you're also an older brother, you need to set aside some time to play with your little sister and just be silly with her, because you're a member of this family and she's special to us. And she should be special to you. And we will set boundaries and give you some space from her, but you also need to engage with your sister. Have some fun with her. She's your little sister. That relationship, it's not optional. I'm not here to inspire. I tell my kids all the time, like, you're best friends. That's not an option. You are best friends. You're going to act like best friends. You're going to treat each other great. Some bickering is normal. Me and my wife are best friends, and we fight sometimes. So some of it's normal, and we don't want to be like overly parenting them so that every time there's an issue, sometimes you have to kind of work out your quirks that we're like jumping on them, because some of that's going to be a little bit normal. You live in close quarters. You know, I never had a roommate I didn't fight with. You know, so it's not the people, it's the situation. You live in close quarters, you're grumpy, you're emotional one day, some of that's normal. But set boundaries and try not to favor both. Try to see it from both sides. The other thing with the leadership, we talked about this last 2 weeks, about the importance of hierarchy. If there's that big of an age, if we have 9 and 3-year-olds, that 9-year-old is in charge. And I would tell, that's the way I do it, okay, in my home. I would tell that 3-year-old, hey, you better respect. So I would just say for my family, like Charles is 3. It's Charles. I hate nicknames, but we love it. I don't know how Char stuck. My sweet daughter came up with Char, and we just call him Char. But it's Charles, and Charles is 3 years old. And then let's just say my middle daughter, Emma. She's good. She's 11. If Charles disobeys her, I'll correct him. Say, hey, that's your older sister. She's telling you to do something. You better do it. Okay. Now at the same time, if she's being unreasonable, if she's using her authority to make her own life convenient, then that's on her. And what I tell the kids is just obey them, and then come tell me, and they'll be in trouble. And we had this issue one time with like one of the older siblings was in charge, was the governor for the day, and decided that like they divvied up the chores, but the way the chores got divvied up, like all the crappy jobs went to the other siblings, and this one got kind of like the cush ones. And I was like, you know, it was pretty obvious what happened, and I called this person out, and she's like, yeah, and she knew, I already said I was trying to hide the identity, but she's like, yeah, she knew exactly what she was doing. I'm like, that's not leadership. You know, that's bullying, abusing authority. Now we think as parents, like, we can't let that happen. So we have to divide it up, and we don't want to give our kids authority over the others because they'll be abused. It's gonna be a more abusive relationship if there isn't that authority. And so now by giving that authority, I can start to coach them and call this out. This is normal behavior in leaders, you know, kind of like they get comfortable and they're not being true leaders. And this isn't like a problem with leadership. It's normal. Even as a parent, if we're just totally honest, if I'm totally honest with myself, there's times where I look at a chore and I'm like, kids, because I don't want to do it, okay? I don't know if that's totally wrong. Like, I had to do some of the grunt work when I was a kid. They can do it too. I'm older now. But at the same time, like, that's a normal condition in leadership. It doesn't mean we avoid leadership. It means that we empower them and we coach them. Hey, this is not good leadership. Would you want me to do that to you? And sometimes you just give them a taste of their own medicine. Be like, oh, sweet. If that's how you see it, well, I'm the daddy. So I hate to do da-da-da-da-da. Go do it. Do it all day until you can start being a better leader to your younger sibling. So coach them and correct them. The other thing, the yelling, intimidations. Oftentimes, the person who yells looks like the bad guy. You know, like you'll see these parents in the store and they're like, they just lose their mind. They're screaming at their kids. And we're like, what a horrible parent. You know, that's never okay. It's like, yeah, but you don't know what was going on. Like, yeah, that parent's okay, that parent should be, I don't want to say condemned. That parent should be corrected, but not for that reason, okay? If she's lost her mind and she's just like lost it with her kids, it's usually her fault because she didn't correct it days ago or years ago, okay? So she's allowed to get into that situation. But usually the parent, the child has overwhelmed them. They're not listening, they're not following, they're not obeying, and the parent just loses it, okay? And it's the same with the kid. And I'm not saying like if the kid is, okay, if your older boy is yelling at the younger sibling, okay, you have to say, is it reasonable? Is first of all, is what he's saying reasonable? So if the kid, if your older sibling says, hey, you need to clear your plate, and the little one is like, whatever, and runs away or sasses him or is rude or something like that, he has a right to enforce that rule. That is your rule. He's enforcing, and we'll get to that in a minute, but that's reasonable. That's not an unreasonable rule. The 3-year-old should obey. And the fact that he has to yell, oftentimes, shows that he doesn't have the authority to enforce the rules, that the younger one isn't respecting him. So he's trying to raise his voice to get compliance, or there's an intimidation factor to get compliance. And we usually blame the leader for that and be like, oh, that's bad leadership. And it is, but it's also bad followership. Obviously, the younger sibling isn't obeying. Like in the military, we see people we do raise voices. We yell. And if we have a soldier and he's not getting it in our normal voice, like, hey, do this, and he's like, well, whatever, or you come back and he's not doing it, we'll raise our voice to let him know that we're serious. And I don't know that that's poor leadership. So you have to look at the situation. Like, I'm not saying you should scream and be a brat, or like, I know kids are like, my kid Colton does that sometimes when he's in leadership, when he can't control the situation or they're not obeying it. I'm like, dude, you don't have to do that. You tell them what to do, and then you discipline them. Or you tell them what to do, and if they still don't do it, like you put them in timeout or something, and they still don't do it, come get me. And they don't want me to come. Okay, they don't want daddy to come. And I tell the younger siblings that too. I'm like, you don't want me to come. You can obey Colton, and Colton's kind of a pushover. And if he punishes you, he'll probably put you in timeout for a minute. But if he has to come get me because you won't obey him when he's the governor, if you watch the other video, this might not make sense if you don't watch the other video, you're in big trouble. And that's how the chain of command works in the military. It's like, if you disrespect your sergeant and he can't control you and you're just like pound sand, and he has to go get like his sergeant major, you're in huge trouble. You're in huge trouble. And unless the order was so egregious, unless the sergeant was like, jump off a cliff, and you're like, no. If it was a reasonable, even a kind of not a huge unreasonable order, you had better obey it, or that sergeant major is going to come down on you, because there's a chain of command and authority. And parents, if you empower your older siblings, you have to back them. You may not always agree with their leadership style. You may not like your husband's leadership style. You may not like your boss's leadership style. You should back them, okay? It might be a little bit different. So you have to look at the situation and be like, is it reasonable? And maybe the older is like being too aggressive or something like that. That doesn't mean that the kid can disobey. That doesn't mean, okay, so this is normal. Okay, my son is a tyrant, and I would love to be in charge of his sister. I don't think be very nice if he was in charge. I missed your second video though, so I want to go back and watch it. Okay, yeah, well, that's all the more reason for him to start learning leadership skills, because it's actually, I think it's common for new leaders to kind of become tyrannical and kind of bullying and bossing. And then when they get into it and they realize it can be exhausting to be a leader, they're going to want to start using better leadership techniques. And of course, they should be punished for being a tyrant. But just avoiding leadership isn't an option. Ultimately, this is a good time to try it out, because they're not in charge. They're in a chain of command. And that's what I was going to say. Like, my children are empowered when they're in charge to enforce my rules. It's not their rules. They can't just make everything up. Sometimes they can make it up a little bit and improvise, but it has to be within the spirit of my rules. It's like husbands and the parents over, mom over the kid and husband over the family. It's not daddy's rules per se. It's really under the umbrella of God. God's the authority, and it rolls down. So a husband can't do anything he wants. Parents can't do anything that they want. And obviously that your son can't do anything that he wants. And oftentimes tyrants, it's not that they're bad, it's that they don't understand leadership. And like in the military, usually it's the corporals that are tyrants because they're new into leadership. And they think that to be obeyed, they have to be aggressive and intense and raise, and all that stuff. And they're not confident in their leadership. But once they start becoming more confident in their leadership, they'll relax. And I remember being a corporal and being so intense, like a little pit bull. They used to love me too. Like when somebody got out of control, they'd be like, dude, get Corporal Tulip or Sergeant Tulip down here. Because I was a pit bull and probably a little bit of a tyrant sometimes, but people listened. And then at the same time, as I got older and I joined the military and got higher up in leadership and stuff like that, you realize, dude, you can relax. I'm confident in my leadership with my kids. Sometimes I have to get in their face or something like that, or jump down their throat, military term. I'm not a positive parenting technique advocate, but I'm confident in my leadership. So I don't have to be as intense. I don't have to be aggressive. So again, I don't think that should be avoided, and you can't wait. Like, I'm going to wait until he's like super good and perfect and like has the heart of Christ, perfect heart of Christ and all this stuff, and then I'm going to empower him. It's like, dude, he's a tyrant. He needs to be put in charge, and we need to start working on this. And again, I don't know what the other age of your children are, but this is so good. Okay, this kills it. You should probably watch the other one. I think it's Frida. It's Fritha. I always mispronounce this. But we deal with that too in my own home. And it goes like this. We rotate governors. And that means if you're a tyrant, tomorrow, the people you tyrannized, they're in charge. So, you know, if your son is terrorizing his sister, and now she may not be old enough to be in charge, but we have a 13-year-old in the house, and she's not always in charge. Sometimes, well, when she turns 13, she's kind of an adult. She's more independent. But when she was like, let's say 12, and then we had a 7-year-old. My son was 7. There's times where he was governor, and he was 7 years old, and she was 12, and she had to obey him. And I think it was so good, too, because it teaches humility. So 10 and 12. This is perfect. Yeah, this is perfect, 10 and 12. Because you should have them both be governesses. I would switch it up a little bit to teach leadership. Otherwise, the younger children never get to lead. And so I would switch it up a little bit, and he'll learn fast. And if he's a tyrant, I mean, it's so good to switch it up, because every once in a while, maybe he gets 3 days and she gets 2. That's what kind of we do. You know, we divide it up. But if he's a tyrant, then she's in charge of him in a few days, and she can pay him back. It's not good, but you know what I mean? It teaches him to become, like, to think in both positions, to know what it is to be a follower and want to be respected and stuff like that, but also what it is to be a leader and want to be obeyed. So it puts him in both shoes and teaches him both. That's what's so good in the military is, like, I'm a sergeant. I want the people down me to respect me and obey me at once. You know, obey me at once. I'm just talking, I told you to do it. I'm not going to argue. You do it, right? At the same time now, I'm also a follower. I have a lieutenant. I have a sergeant major. And so now I know what it is to need to be obeyed and respect and stuff like that. So I rendered up the chain of command. So I would flip the roles as well and put her in charge sometimes. And it's really interesting too, because she's younger and there's a pecking order, and she's going to have trouble taking charge. And usually the younger children, I talked about this before with my son, maybe it was in the last video, or at least it was in the book or something, but I put him in charge and his older sister just ran over him. I told him, I put him in charge. I'm like, hey, you guys need to rake the leaves. It was a big project, and it's a big responsibility. I think he was like 7 at the time. I'm like, you get it done. You're in charge. Tell the girls what, blah, blah, blah. I come out a little bit later. He's like, and he's a good kid. He's a hard worker. He's out there raking the leaves by himself. I'm like, Cole, what happened? He's like, oh, they wouldn't listen to me and stuff. And so it was just easier if I just rake it myself. And at one point you're like, well, it's cool that, like, you were humble and you did it or whatever. But that's not the point of the exercise. Like, you were a leader. It wasn't an option to do it yourself. You get the girls back out here. And those girls, it was really hard for them to humble themselves and obey their little brother. It was really hard for them. And I know what it is, because I've experienced it myself. I've had officers, when I went to prep school, there was this guy, God bless him, this skinny little guy, looked like a vulture. And he just relished telling people what to do. And even though I loved to be obeyed, I like to be in charge, a sergeant, I didn't like to obey him. I just couldn't stand it. And we butted heads, and he punished me a lot. And I'd be like, yeah, but he's such a whatever. And they're like, he's in charge, okay? I'm sorry you don't like his style, but he's in charge. You obey him. He didn't tell you to do something that was unreasonable. Now, eventually, I as a follower, I also learned, interestingly, I'm like, if you obey this guy, like he was great. I mean, once he was on your side, he was really good. And when I had people that I was just sick of dealing with in my own area, I'd go get Walters. He was like a lieutenant or something. I'd go get Walters and be like, Walters, these guys, they have issues with authority, Walters. they think they don't have to obey up the chain of command, Walters. And he would sort them out for me. And he was smug and whatever. But we learned. In other words, like, being a follower, being a leader, you have to start practicing it. You have to start learning it. They'll understand what it is to be talked down to be mistreated, and it'll help them be a better leader. And because you know what I mean, they'll understand that's not how I wanted to be treated. That's not effective leadership. It makes that other person hate you and not want to obey you. And now you can't get the job done because they literally would rather get in trouble than obey you. They're so upset with you, right? And so you have to, and you're the leader. If you don't get it done, it's on you. So you have to learn effective leadership skills. You can't be a tyrant. Tyrants it doesn't work, because at some point people mutiny and they will martyr themselves before they obey a tyrant. Like, they are sick of it, right? So you have to, but at the same time, you can't be a pushover. Nice guys can't lead anybody. I've seen it in the military. They get walked all over, and then they actually become that screaming parent in the store who has no control, and now they're lashing out because they've lost control, and they're really upset, and it becomes crazy. But if you practice leadership, it's like a skill, and you'll become it. And kids are always excited. They always want to be tyrants. They're always excited to take charge. I'm telling you, that's normal. When we first started this, my kids couldn't wait to be the governor for the day. They're all motivated. They love to tell people what to do. Now I'm like, hey, who wants to be the governor? And nobody raises their hand. They're like, not me. Because they know it's a burden responsibility. And when things don't get done, I'm coming to them. And it's hard to manage people. It's hard to get them to want to clean your room. It's easy to yell at them and tell them to do it. It's hard to get them to do it and inspire them and make them want to do it. And it's a challenge. And so eventually they won't be so excited to be in charge. And you got to work on that, because leadership is powerful. And these kids they'll be running a family. So they need to work out leadership skills now. Like your son, someday he'll get married. He'll be the head of a family. If he can't be a tyrant, he's got to learn effective leadership skills. And it's the other way too. Like a lot of wives, the husbands don't know how to lead, and a lot of the wives don't know how to follow. They've never had to do that. And so they think, oh, I should have to follow until my husband said it like that, or he's being rude and stuff like that. And it ends up creating a mutiny. It ends up creating chaos in the home, where you can just humbly, like, yeah, he said it rude, but I'll humbly obey. Or, is a leader, just having some compassion for him too, because you know what it is to be a follower. You know how hard it is to bite your tongue. You know how hard it is to take leadership from other people or obey other people. And so you have compassion for that. So anyway, okay, that's back on the leadership talk from last time. But I just want to talk about that too, with the anger thing. So sometimes that's legitimate. Like we get so frustrated that we yell and stuff like that, but it doesn't mean necessarily that the problem is the yelling. It might be that there's not that chain of command. People aren't listening. There's no defined rules too. That's the other thing. A lot of times we'll put the kids in charge, but there's no laid out rules. Like when I was a sergeant, I knew the extent of my authority in the military and at prep school. I knew the extent of my authority. I knew what rules I could enforce. I knew I couldn't just make the people do whatever I wanted. I couldn't just walk through the hallway and be like, hey, go away, or stop talking because you're annoying me. That wasn't an option. I mean, I could probably get away with it. And my sergeant, like the chain of command, the tax, if I told somebody to stop talking in the hallway and they didn't, they would be in trouble. Because it's not like egregious. I didn't say jump out the window, right? They would be in trouble for not obeying me. But they could wait until Monday when the TAC comes back. They could go into the office and say, hey, Sergeant Latulip is telling people, because he's annoyed or whatever, we can't even talk in the hallway. And then the officer brings me in privately and says, are you being a tyrant? Are you abusing your authority? Why can't they talk in the hallway? And now I'm in trouble. So the younger ones should know that they should obey unless it's dangerous or just outrageous. But the older one should know that they're accountable. They're not in charge. I mean, they're in charge to an extent, but they're under a chain of command. They're basically working for you. They are your voice when you're not there. It's your rules that they're enforcing. So if my kid is breaking the rules, other family members can correct them, say, hey, that's against the rules. And I love that. But they can't just use their authority to be like, make way, leave this, I want this whole room to myself because you guys are annoying me or something. Anyway, all right, Brenda, tantrums. I don't want to go too long today, Brenda. I didn't have time to prepare. This is something specific with tantrums. The biggest, and the reason I don't want to just do this is, one, my wife's like, you can't do these videos for like 2 hours. Like people won't watch it. It's too long. And other people on YouTube do like 5 to 10 minute videos. Thank you for going back over the hierarchy concept. I'm going to work at this. Yeah, and Christian, I'll say that too, is you have to work through it. There's no perfect system. It's like a coach, right? And he's like, how do you win a soccer game? And he's got all these strategies, and then he goes out and loses. It's like, this is a strategy. And the other thing is, you'll be disciplining your kids your whole life. You have to work through these things. If a kid loses his temper, or he's being aggressive or something like that, like that's normal, okay? Like they used to hit each other in the face with, little kids, and we got that out of the way. Now we're going to do this. And eventually we'll get to the point where we're working on high manners and etiquette because we're on that level of greatness, but we're going to keep working on it, right? But this is normal to work through, and every kid is a little bit different. And people think like they're looking for a pill or a magic bullet. Like you'll see it on YouTube, like 10 simple steps to transfer your home immediately. And it's so exciting and appealing, and it doesn't work. But this is not easy. This is a process that'll take years. Like leadership, we start teaching it at 7, and I'm hoping by the time they're like 16, 17, 18, they've got the concept. And that's why we're practicing leadership in the home while they're under my authority and I can coach them. Once they're the head of a family, it's too late. And all of these things are normal. Losing your temper, that's normal. I lose my temper too. Sometimes I wish I had somebody to correct me sometimes, right? So anyway, just think about it like that. Like, you're never going to completely eliminate it. Your kids are going to have bad days. They're going to have off days. We're just looking for progress, but there's no perfect solution. It's like the dog whisperer, right? I don't know if you've ever watched that, the dog whisperer. He's like magic with dogs. And dogs are even easier than people for sure, right? Like you could kind of like work the dog, but I remember he's like the perfect dog whisperer, and the people they're watching the show and they're all like waiting. He like goes up to this dog and he puts out his hand and he's like, tss, tss, what if you've seen the show, you know what he's doing. He's like controlling that dog and being the alpha and all that stuff. And then the dog just like bites into his hand, and, like rips his hand, starts shaking it. So even the master is going to come up against a hard case every once in a while, and it's going to take time. And sometimes we watch that show and we think, oh man, it was a total transformation. And your mind is thinking, I just watched that unfold in 15 minutes. He took that crazy pit bull and he turned him into this whatever. And we think, wow, that's amazing. But actually, he took him back to his place for like 6 months and worked with him. It's hard, And I remember getting a puppy and I'm like, just going to do what Caesar Milanda. I'm going to make this thing amazing. And it was not easy. And we had accidents on the floor and it was annoying and he still barks. And it's a battle. And so even parenting, it's not a science. Your children aren't robots, or if you just type in the program, they just work. That's why I say it's the art of raising children for greatness. It is an art. And is it great? I think I shouldn't say great artist. I'm just, greatness is on my mind, right? As a good artist myself, there are times I get done with something, I'm like, oh God, what happened? And I'm a professional artist and I don't know what happened. I don't know what went wrong. And there are times with my kids and I'm like, dude, like we've been over this. Like, why can I not break through on this one? Why is this one? We have one issue. And I think I know why, but it's addiction to this video game that I introduced him to. I'm so dumb. And I should know better because I became addicted to this game myself, Age of Empires. As an adult, and I had to get it out of the home because it was ruining my life. And I brought that for my kids. I'm like, this will be fun for them. And I'm having trouble breaking through on that. And it's probably I just need to get rid of the game. But anyway, in other words, don't lose heart. So I guess what I'm saying is some of this is normal. It's a battleground. Just think of it as like a coach. It's a challenge. You don't have to be annoyed with it. You can just laugh and be like, oh, here we go again. Like, have some fun with it. Brenda, if you're watching, my husband, my son often sounds like, yeah, I know. It's so funny too, because we're not perfect. And my little kid the other day, Jonathan, God bless him, he's so fun. He's such a funny kid. He's a little bit behind in some areas, but he's like a genius. He's weird. He's like the typical, like stereotypical homeschooler. But he was like, what the? And he's been saying that. And I'm like, and my wife was like, don't you say it. Where did you get that? Hey, Brenda. I was like, where did you get that? And she's like all mad. And I'm like, and then I realized that I say that all the time. I'm like, what the? And I used to cuss a lot, especially in the military. It's just part of our vocabulary. It's not even offensive. It's probably not in the kinder, gentler military anymore. But I mean, I'm not justifying it, but I used to cuss sometimes. I still do sometimes. I have to be real careful when I'm around. Because, for some buddies, it's just part of the conversation. Like military guys, it's just our vocabulary. And then you go to, like church people and they're like, oh, he said. But anyway, so my kid is picking that up and you're like, yeah, it's from me. He's watching me and I'm like bad. And sometimes like, I remember my daughter, I'm like, you're acting like a tyrant. And she did something and then I'm like, wait, I do that. And anyway, so it's a battle and we're not perfect parents. And so there's going to be that end of it. And then they're not perfect people and it's a struggle. So when you read this book and you read this concept of greatness and stuff, please don't think I'm going to implement this afternoon and things are going to be okay. It's going to be like, I'm going to implement this and I'm going to get it wrong and we're going to work on it. And maybe in 2 or 3 years, I'm going to be, if your kid is amazing by the time they're 17, 18, or maybe we're thinking 30 and you're like, wow, I did it. Look, he's 30 years old. And boom. But you may not know it until they're 30. I mean, there is a process. Okay. Nobody believed in me. I think I was a lost cause to a lot of people for a long time. And they could not break me and they couldn't get through to me. And I remember a teacher in school even telling me in the DARE program, they're like, and we have like our eyes on certain people that are, problem or whatever. And I asked the cop and the teacher, I'm like, am I one of those? And they're like, we won't say, but you knew who I was. Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is like, you don't know. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen to that kid and what's in store for them. And, I guess what I'm saying is that if you have the right process and you work this out and you discipline them consistently and you get on board, you'll be making progress. But sometimes it doesn't feel that way. It's like, it's why you take before and after pictures when you're losing weight. They're like, okay, show us your belly. And they take the picture. And then 6 months later, you're all depressed and you're like, oh, it just doesn't seem to be working. Like, what is going on? I'm not getting the goals, the results I want. And then they're like, okay, let's take a picture. And you compare the before and after picture. And you don't even realize like, wow, I lost tons of weight. Like, that's why it's so important to get on the scale, right? Even before they take your weight and then after, because sometimes in the mix of it, it's like that boiling frog. You lose perspective day to day. You don't realize you've actually made a ton of progress. And sometimes I get that way too. And then I like so frustrated about something like, why, like we're on table manners. I'm like, why are you chewing with your mouth open or something, And I have to look at perspective and be like, other kids are out there, they're doing drugs. I saw a kid, F you to their parents, like cursing and stuff. I'm like, and my kid's like chewing with their mouth open. And sometimes she, when she says, when I tell her to do something, she'll say, yeah. Or she'll say it lackadaisically. So that's where we are. I hate lackadaisical attitudes. And that's where you, instead of saying, yes, Sergeant, you're like, Roger, okay, whatever, sure, like the hippie, sure. That's lackadaisical attitude. And it upsets me. And I was realizing, I'm like kind of getting on my daughter for it. And I'm like, it's pretty cool. She's actually 13 and she doesn't defy me. She obeys me for the most part. And we're to lackadaisical attitudes. Actually we're okay. And sometimes she chews with her mouth open and stuff. It annoys me. Is it the end of the world? You know what I mean? There is that sense of progress that we want things perfect. We're dreaming of utopia, which is heaven, right? It's in us and we want perfection. And sometimes it can discourage us and we lose perspective that actually we're pretty good. I was, when I wrestled, I got the ears still, I still fight and box and jiu-jitsu and stuff. But when I wrestled, I was pretty good. A lot of people would have loved to have been as good as me. I was the captain of the team and I won tournaments and I got MVP, most valuable wrestler. And I won lots of tournaments and I went to state championship and I got third. I got beat. And it was devastating. And I remember thinking like really down on myself and just like, and then it's like, it's perspective. It's like, I wanted to be, if I had won the state championship, it wouldn't have been good enough. I would want nationals. So there's always that sense of that longing for better, for perfection. And then at the same time, there was tons of people who would have loved a third place medal. So we just have to be aware of that too. Like, oh, my kid, sometimes he's rude to his sister. Okay, but he's not doing drugs. He's learning. We were all rude to our sisters. Even as a parent, sometimes we're tyrants and we have to look back at ourselves and be like, dude, like, is this necessary? Am I just going overboard? So anyway, I guess that's my point. I just want to end on that is that you're doing okay. Trust the system. Read the books. This is a ramble. I don't even know what I'm saying after I'm just talking from the heart. But read the books. I have a great system. The fattest chapter in that book is discipline. I don't like to talk about it on here because it's so controversial these days and you don't understand it. I have to lay it out perfectly for you. I lay it out perfectly in the book. You'll understand how discipline should work, how effective it is. A lot of these are self-control issues. Children don't have self-control. And a lot of parents are being lied to with this positive parenting movement. It goes two ways. One is that your kid has a behavioral disorder and they want to drug them because that comes from the science is their God and everything is science and everything is biology and you just have to fix them. And you'll also see like the natural kind of like the granola, the unschooling movement, and they'll just say, oh, it's just diet. He just has too much sugar in his diet. Some of that's true. Like you eat too much sugar, you can be wound up and stuff like that. But you know what? I never had too much sugar in my diet at military school. Okay, I ate lots of sugar and it never made me misbehave because I respected the authority, right? Sometimes he's not getting enough rest. I went through special forces selection. There was a time when I didn't get rest for 2 days and I was carrying a heavy pack and it was like a marathon for 2 days, right? And I never forgot to be respectful to my sergeant because I wouldn't dare, okay? So there is some of that circumstantial stuff that we want to look at, but a lot of this we have to teach our children self-control. We have to properly discipline them, establish discipline. Brenda, I didn't want to get into tantrums too much tonight because it's controversial. We have a lot to talk about, and I really want to think about that. I'll probably do that next week. Tantrums are a little bit different because one, you're not usually dealing with past the age of 7. If they're before 7, you're dealing with someone who is not as reasonable. They're not as mature. There's like a real transition that happens when your kid turns 7. And there's a threshold there of transition. So it's not like, oh, he's 7. But I've dealt with that, okay? And not all my children. A few of my children were like, perfect. I mean it. I mean it. Like, and I'm like, hey, you better even be better because God will judge you to higher standard. You can't be like, oh, I'm not as bad as that sibling. God will judge you higher because you have your personality is wired a little bit differently. And they were really good. Like my daughter Emma, when she would get upset, she used to throw tantrums, but they were silent tantrums. So we didn't even know she was throwing a fit for a long time when she was a little baby. She would get down on her belly and she would push herself across the floor all the way to the other end of the wall. That was it. Okay, Charles, when he gets really upset, I mean, this is perfect, okay? He gets really upset. about something. He doesn't do this anymore, but when he was like 2, he'd get really upset. He'd say, I'm going to bed. And he'd just go to his room and he'd put himself to nap and he'd fall asleep. He was throwing a fit. It was an attitude, but it was like, wow, thank God. You know, what a way to deal with it. It was still a problem though. He's still throwing a fit. So every kid is different. And I have one kid who's really, I mean, my Bennett, he's tough. And once we get him good, he's stubborn. So he'll be unbreakable once we get him. But Bennett just turned 5 and we're working with him. He's really turned a corner. They'll start turning a corner at 5, 7 is good. And then it should just get better and better. But he used to, actually Jonathan, the one who did the little video for you, he used to throw tantrums that just, we actually thought something was wrong with him. He was a preemie and there's just, you know, he's been a little bit different. And he had unbreakable tantrums. Just like, whoa. But guess what? He just turned 7. He's super respectful. He wouldn't dare throw a tantrum. He wouldn't dare to, I mean, he's like a really good kid. People love him. He's so sweet. I'm like, you don't even know, okay? And there was a time where like, there might be something wrong with this one. Our methods are not working, okay? But we continued with the process. It took him a little bit longer. And now he's excelling. He's actually a really good kid. He's one of my better behaved kids now. So believe in the process. Know that every kid's different. With the tantrums, I honestly believe, Brenda, it's usually a discipline problem. And I know that's offensive because, you know, that can come across as like, oh, maybe I'm doing something wrong. And I wouldn't. It's just like technique. I talk about jujitsu. It's like if somebody's doing the wrong chokehold, this is for jujitsu, not kids. And it's not working. Sometimes I'll think, dude, it's not working. I'm like, dude, no, you're doing it a little, just adjust it a little bit here. And I talk about that in the book, like understanding discipline. And so it doesn't mean you're bad. It doesn't mean you're, you know, anything, but there might be a discipline problem. And the problem is you go online, and just before I watched this, I was like, I wonder what people say about disciplining, you know, kids with anger issues. And I look at this advice, and it's from this genius. He's a psychologist, and he basically says what every positive parent says, like, never yell, never spank your kid. Like, you need to understand them. Remember, you're just teaching them. And if we're teaching them, we don't yell. And I'm like, what about sports? They yelled at me in sports. It wasn't so horrible. I'm not defending yelling. I'm just saying, like, it's just this yuppie nonsense. Like, be sure to listen to your kid and just remember that they're trying to express something, or you know what I mean. And so there's a lot of bad advice, and we'll start implementing it because, and this is what I'm talking about in this new book, Power, coming out. One of the powers is wisdom, okay? And there's no wisdom anymore. We don't even know how to find wisdom, okay? And so we have a lot of false wisdom out there that it sounds really good. You're like, man, that just clicked. Yeah, I'll implement that. That sounds so good. And a lot of people have been led astray. There's been some Bible scholars recently, and I mean, you listen to them, and if you didn't know anything about the Bible, you're like, yeah, wow, what a genius. And now I'm just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they're teaching that. So sometimes things sound good to us. They sound reasonable, and we adopt them as techniques, but they just sound good. They don't work. So anyway, you want to get sound advice. I think my advice is solid. I have 7 children. I have 13, and I have 3. We've had 2. I would say 2 that actually threw tantrum. They're my boys. My most stubborn child was my oldest. Still is. God bless her. But the tantrums, we had 2. The worst one was Jonathan, and he's fixed. We fixed him. He's all done. He wouldn't dare throw a tantrum anymore. He's at that age of reason. He knows what happens. And in the book, I talk about the stove too. Like kids are not dumb. They're not irrational. They can control themselves. And I give the example of a stove. You know, you'll see a kid and you'll be like, dude, don't touch that stove. Don't touch that stove. You'll get burned. Don't touch that stove. And one day that little kid is like, even a little baby is like, I'm going to touch that stove because dad said no. Boom, they touch that stove and they get burned. They never touch the stove again. They totally get it, okay? And they're not like ADD. They can't help themselves. They just touch it again and get burned and touch it again and get burned. Like, it's amazing. They have the self-control to never touch the stove again. And if you're consistent with discipline and there are boundaries, you do not cross that line. Your kid will get it. They'll pick up on their environment very quickly. The kids pick up on their environment, okay? They're wired to survive in the wild. And they know when something's dangerous. They know if they fall and they get hurt, they're going to do something differently. And the problem is a lot of times we let them control us. We let them abuse us. When they're babies, it makes sense. Like we literally condition them to scream. I mean, that's what they do. They scream, they throw a fit, and we run and feed them. And that's normal. You're supposed to. They're a baby. But that transition is really hard because literally the first habit they learn is I scream and I throw a fit and I get even more angry and eventually I get fed. Mommy will eventually get out of bed no matter how tired she is if I just scream enough. And so that's wired into them. That habit is wired in them. It's hard to break that habit with some kids. It really is hard, but you can do it. And you just have to, I say, make it like the stove. And I talk about that in the book, like the importance of corporal punishment, spanking. It is so important. I give the greatest defense of that anybody's ever written, in my opinion. I've never come across a better defense. I've been told by many people, like, that is the most intellectual, like, philosophical discussion on spanking. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I turned it into like this, and not just on spanking, but discipline. And I think when you get through with it, I think you'll understand and you'll know how to, like, draw the line, draw boundaries. I will say it's impossible. I didn't really want to talk about tantrums. And some of this is going to be controversial. That's why I'm afraid, Brenda. I'm afraid I'm going to tell it to you and you're not going to like it. And I didn't really get to lay out my case. I never start with the answer. I usually, like, lead people to it, right? And they don't even know where they're going. And then they accept it. But if I just start with the answer, people reject it and I can't then back it up. But I would say I don't think tantrums are possible to control without corporal punishment. And that's my opinion. I talk about that in the book. I've dealt with that myself. We did, for a very short time, we did preschool. I was like, man, we got this preschool curriculum. We want to test it out. We'll get some kids and it's going to be beautiful. So we got some kids in our home. Then my wife was teaching it while I'm upstairs, writing and revealing school. But spanking was off the table because we don't spank other people's kids, for one. And two, there's liability. It's just not good. So we said spanking was off the table. And I'm telling you, we had a heck of a time with one of the boys who threw tantrums. We couldn't control him. There was nothing to do. In the beginning, a few times he would obey because his dad spanked him. And his dad's like, what? We're going home. But eventually, it's just the kid couldn't control himself. And there wasn't that immediate correction. So he was always sorry when his dad got there and stuff. But there wasn't that immediate spot correction. And in the beginning, I remember the first time I came downstairs, and I talk about this in my book, how my wife was pregnant. I used to listen to my headphones, noise canceling. I'm writing upstairs, and I just hear this screaming down there, and I'm like, dude. And I put it down. I come downstairs, and my wife is chasing this little boy around the couch, and he's spitting at her, and he's running and jumping over, and she can't catch him. And I just can't. And she's like 8 months pregnant. I just fly over the couch, and I must have had a face. I think I don't even mean to, but I think I have a scary face sometimes. I looked at it the other day, and I was like, dude, it is mean. It can be mean. And I think this kid was like horrified. He's like, dude, this guy is going to light me up. He immediately just like froze and like wanted to obey. The problem is later he realized I can't actually do anything. I can't really do anything other than be intimidating, or we could take toys or something like that, but I can't actually spank this kid. And so eventually he didn't have much respect for me either. And he was a trouble kid. Like, that's why he came to our preschool. That he'd gotten in trouble at other preschools. And after I left, he got out of preschool. So he was a hard nut to crack. And my wife had a lot of little kids in the room, so it was tough. And we would watch the Super Nanny. We're like looking for these positive parenting techniques, like anything but corporal punishment. We tried everything, and sometimes he obeyed if he really wanted it, but we never got to the heart of the issue. There was never that respect. God says that the beginning of wisdom is fear of God is the beginning of wisdom. There should be a fear between parents and children, and people think that that's bad. Oh, fear is bad. No, fear is. I'm getting into everything now. And these are in the book. I talk about this. Fear is normal. God put fear in there to keep you alive. It's good to have fear. My kids don't walk around fearful. They love me. We have fun. We joke. We laugh. The only time they're afraid of daddy is when they should be. When they hit their sibling or something. They sass their mom, and I walk into the room. They're like, oh, dad's here. But it's not like they walk around shaking, okay? It's just like the stove. Your kids, once they know how the stove works, they don't like shake. They go and cook on it. They like the stove. There's no problem with the stove when they figure out how it works, even though it burned them. That's how daddy is. It's like, dude, you have these boundaries. Just don't touch the burger, Just don't say sass mommy, okay? And there's no problem. It's not like they walk in fear. Like, that's what these liberal, positive parenting, they control you. Like, oh, you're using fear and control. Like, yeah, there's no problem with fear. Like I said, in America, we worship one emotion. That's pleasure or happiness, right? I love fear. The fear, and the politicians say, hey, they're using fear-mongering or fear. He's appealing to fear. There's a time to be afraid. There is a time to be afraid and appeal to fear. That's reasonable. If your ship's going down, you should be like, hey, we should probably be alarmed. And then you have that positive guy who's like, I'm going to be positive about it. You're just being negative. Or you're just fear-mongering. Okay, whatever. So there's nothing wrong with fear. Your kids should be afraid. They should be afraid to do certain things, certain bad behaviors. My kids should be afraid to punch their sister. They should be afraid of that. That's normal. That's healthy for them to be afraid of that. They should be afraid to sass their mom. Okay, because it's a spiritual thing. Like if you're dishonoring your mom, that's serious. It's not just because it hurts mom. It's like that's a serious sin. That's one of the 10 Commandments. So we take it serious, and they should be afraid to do that. That said, Brenda, it's like a 70-page chapter on discipline. So I don't know if I can cover it all, but I know that if you read it, you'd understand the tantrum tantrums and how to deal with it. And there's no magic bullet. Actually, there is actually for tantrum tantrums, you can make them stop really quick. I will say that one time or 2 times it didn't work for me immediately. Okay, spanking doesn't work immediately 2 times. And it was usually the first time I implemented it. The first time I spanked my daughter, I think she, it's like a new reality. It's like you don't understand it. I think she didn't understand quite a way. And I think she thought if I just throw a bigger fit, he'll stop. Because I throw fits, I got milk, I throw fits, like I can make this happen. And there was a battle the first time. That's the only child that didn't immediately respond to spanking. How you do spanking is everything. If you do spanking incorrectly, it will not work for you. And I know lots of people who are like, oh, spanking doesn't work for me. And I've witnessed a few. I had a buddy, I talk about in the book. I have a buddy who I went through special forces with. He's a training with. He's a Green Beret now. I'm not. But he is. He's like, spanking doesn't work for me. And I got to watch. Like he showed me one time. He's just like, because his kid was being so bad and just defiant and giggling about it and just didn't respect his dad. And this dude's a tough Green Beret. And finally he brings him over to spank him and he's like that. And then the kid giggles. Like the kid was afraid for a minute. And then the kid like giggles and runs off. And he's like, see, it just doesn't work. I'm like, dude, I can make it work. But at any rate, you have to do it with technique. You can't wait till the end. You can't wait. Like you'll hear a lot of people because they're weak, actually. They're intellectually weak. They're losing ground. And so they can no longer justify spanking. So they'll say, well, I just use this as a last resort. Well, then there you go. No wonder it doesn't work very well. Spanking is not a last resort. That's like touching the stove. Imagine if your kid touched the stove like 50 times and it didn't burn him. It was hot, but it didn't burn him. He keeps touching the stove, doesn't burn him. And then all of a sudden it burns him. And then he touches the stone again and it burns him. It's like, that's a horrible way to teach anybody anything. The kid's like, he is afraid of the stove. It misfires. It doesn't operate properly. He doesn't know how to work around it, right? And if you're one of those parents who like disciplines your kid sporadically, like you'll say like, all of a sudden like, shit, I can't take it anymore. And then you spank your kid. The kid's like, dude, what is your problem? I did this same, I asked you like 50 times. You never did this before. And you become that erratic stove that they don't know how to operate around. And the kid realizes like, oh, I got spanked because mom lost control. She can't take it anymore. Not because of my bad behavior. So you have to be consistent. And with sassing and stuff, like because my kids know that I will, because they know I will. And if anything, I've been a little lax about it lately. I don't like spank my kids, and I don't have the wooden spoons that hurt my hands. And I don't think we like to spank our kids. So I've been getting some boundaries pushed on me. But I know that when I react quickly, swiftly with the spanking, immediate discipline. No warnings. I talk about in the book that warnings are the worst thing you can do. The only time you give somebody warnings is when you're first teaching them something, a new concept, like the 3-year-old. Hey, do this. Hey, remember, we're doing this. And I'm coaching them. I'm teaching them. But once they know the rule and they had better obey. There's no warnings unless you built up merit. And I talk about the merit system is so important. Merit's important because every kid isn't perfect. That's why it's such a big chapter. Because while I talk about these inflexible rules and discipline, merit has to be built into the system because sometimes kids have a bad day and we don't need to just crush them for it. So that has to be built in the system. Like the other day, my daughter did something. My middle daughter, Emma, she's a blessing to us. And she did something and somebody else was like, well, how come she got away with it? I'm like, you know what? Because she built up a bunch of merit. She does so much for me that she messed up this time. And I let her get away with it because she built up merit. And that's normal. That's part of the system. I'm not breaking my rules. That's built into the rules. And if you build up merit and I feel good about you and you're always like contributing and stuff, yeah, I'm not going to jump down your throat because you made a mistake. You had a bad day. You had a bad attitude for a moment. I might correct you and say, hey, do you realize what you're talking to me? Because you've been so good. I don't want to discipline you this time, but don't do that again. Where there's other kids and they haven't built up that merit. Anyway. So in other words, discipline, it's not this 1, 2, 3 step thing. Brenda, it's a huge chapter in the book. I highly recommend you read it. You can just skip it. These chapters, you don't have to read it in order. Just skip to that chapter and character and read that. And then I'll try to talk a little bit more about tantrums specifically next week. If you still have more questions I hope some of what I've said has cleared some things up. If you still have more questions, then ask them specifically. It really helps if you're specific about it, and I'll try to address those. I don't know how much more I would want to say on tantrums. I really feel like you guys should read the book on that one because It is so controversial, and we live in a social media thing. This will be on the internet forever. And my form of discipline, according to the positive parents, is child abuse. I'll just say it. Why not? It is. Now, they can drug their kids. That's not child abuse. Like, they can isolate them, or, they do all sorts of things. I'm like, dude, that is so bad. But what I do to them is horrible, and there's a cancel culture, and someday, I don't know. So my wife is like, you should not talk about discipline on there. Spanking, there are people who want spanking to be a crime. I was talking to some dude the other day in this group. It's a group that I'm in. I'm not going to put any more time into it, but it's run by liberals, very liberal. I'm like the token conservative. They invite it to, because they want a balanced approach. And they're like, if you beat your child, like, you should be shot, basically, because you're beating them, or you're abusing them, or you're fear and all this stuff. I'm like, dude, there's just so much to unravel there, and so that's the other side. So there's certain things, like, I have to be really careful how I say, and sometimes if I'm speaking off the cuff on one of those issues, a soundbite could crucify me if I don't say it perfectly. I've probably already said lots of things on here that'll be I'll be crucified someday when if I ever become popular. They'll get me. So anyway, that's why I love the book, because I can carefully lay it out and just really build the case, and I'm very careful about what I say. I can't misspeak and have a soundbite that they can use to destroy me. So I guess what I'm saying, Brenda, is not that I won't address it. I just want to put a little more thought into exactly, like, I want to go read my own book a little bit more again and, like, brush it up, like, okay, how would I handle that situation of tantrums? Like, here's the steps that I would take. So I want to be really careful with how I say it. But I guess I'm not afraid of it. I've already crossed that line. Anyway, all right, Brenda, I know I didn't answer perfectly. I'll get to that. I know we talked about some people wanting history and grammar. I'm not neglecting those. Those will come soon. I love to talk about history. I love to talk about grammar. I'm a writer. I love grammar. It's not boring. It can be boring the way they teach it in schools, but my version, the way I do it, is not boring. It's exciting. It's fun. It's interesting. I'll talk about those. Justice, the criminal justice system. People are saying, like, what is this mob rule? And what is this, this justice? Like, what is your commentary on what we're seeing happen? We saw a guy, he was convicted in social media. Everybody agreed he was guilty before there was even a trial. We've thrown out our trial by jury. It's like they are crucifying people. We're entering the stages of revolution, in my opinion. I don't know if we'll continue down it, but this is absolutely, they have a crowd that'll come to your house and destroy you if you have the wrong opinion. So we can definitely talk about that. We can definitely talk about the criminal justice system, and I think it's really important, wisdom, and that's going to be my next book. It's going to be a big fat chapter on wisdom, and I think of wisdom. It wasn't even going to be in my book. It was an afterthought, and now it's becoming one of the most powerful, like, biggest chapters on wisdom is, where do you find wisdom? Believe it or not, you find wisdom attached to authority, and this was like something that just hit me the other day. It's like, oh my goodness, like, there's, we've been told that you never argue from authority. It's irrational to argue from authority. That's not true, actually. That's their God. That's their God. Reason is their God. It's not my God. I think authority is actually a great argument sometimes. But that's another topic. I'm gonna shut it off. All right, but I will talk about those issues. In other words, I saw your comments. I saw the things you want to talk about. I couldn't address it all tonight because I don't have 18 hours, and I can just talk and talk and talk. So I just covered Kristen stuff tonight. Brenda I'll probably cover next week with a little more thought, and then I'll cover some of those other topics. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for sticking it out if you're here. And the lives are so important, guys. Come to the lives because you can ask questions in real time. Someday I'll probably bring Janine in here. She can, like, read the questions if we have more, and I'll try to answer them in real time. And like last week when I talked about authority, I think I said some things that kind of people took maybe the wrong way. Like, should we, it raised a lot of other controversy and more questions. And those would be things, if you're on the live, you can say, hey, do you mean this? And I could be like, oh, no, I'm not talking about that. And I can clarify a little bit more. So always come to the lives if you can, if you have questions. Sometimes I do these videos and I leave holes because it's not like writing a book. I leave holes in my arguments and stuff, and maybe it confuses you. But if you're on the live, you can be like, hey, that doesn't make sense. Do you mean this? And I can be like, no. You know what I mean? Okay. All right, guys, thank you so much. I'll be back next week, and I hope you guys have a great, it's hard to do live, but I hope you guys are chugging along. You've started the greatness movement. I would love to get feedback too, how it's going. And I know it's a long process and stuff, but it's exciting. Like, we're in this together. I just realized the other day, a new post came up or somebody commented on an old video, and I was like, it was from a year ago. I'm like, wow, I've been doing this for a year, over a year now. So anyway, it's exciting. All right, thank you guys so much. I'm done. See you next week.